Good evening, everyone. My name is Brock McMillan. I'm the chair of the Central Region RAC, and I'll call this meeting to order at 6:00 p.m. on May 11th, 2021. Due to the continued presence of COVID in Utah and associated public health and safety risks, large public gatherings are still strongly discouraged by the CDC and many local health departments. Based on these risks and recommendations, the Division of Wildlife Resources and chair of this body have determined that the RAC and Wildlife Board meetings will continue in an electronic format for the time being. Anyone wishing to comment on agenda topics and future meetings or to observe this meeting may do so by logging onto the division's webpage, where instructions and links are provided. Hopefully this ends pretty in the near future. I'd like to welcome all the RAC members, and we'll do a roll call to see who's here. AJ Maurer.
I'm here.
Ben Louder.
Here.
Chris Schmitz.
Here.
Danny Potts. Eric Reed.
Here.
Danny, are you there? Jake Still. Josh Leonard. Ken Strong.
Here.
Luke Decker.
Here.
Mike Christensen.
Here.
Scott Jensen.
Here.
Steve Lund. Looks like we have 9 people here, which is plenty for a quorum. I was only notified of Josh not being here. Would also like to welcome the DWR staff, specifically those that provided presentations and are available to answer questions throughout the meeting. That includes Blair Stringham, the Migratory Game Bird Program Coordinator, and Kyle Maynard, the Assistant Attorney General. I'd also like to welcome the public who are watching this on YouTube. You will not be able to provide live comments during this meeting. However, presentations were provided in advance and you had an opportunity to provide comment. We received several comments to the system, and I think everybody on the RAC received well over 100 comments from other individuals that sent emails directly to us. The first item of business is a call for a motion to approve the agenda and the past minutes.
So moved.
Thank you, Ken. A second?
Second it.
Thank you, Chris. I'll call AJ. AJ Maurer. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Ben Louder.
Yes.
Chris Schmitz.
Yes.
Eric Reed.
Yes.
Ken Strong.
Yes.
Luke Decker.
Yes.
Mike Christensen.
Yes.
Scott Jensen.
Yes.
Has anybody else joined since we started? Excellent. Okay. The next item is for me to provide a brief update on what happened at the last board meeting. And so the last board meeting was on April 29th, just a few weeks ago, and there were several action items in that board meeting. The first item on the board meeting was the buck deer permit recommendations. There was a motion by the board to approve a 600 permit decrease on the Manti unit and to keep the San Juan Abajo unit permits the same as in 2020. That motion passed unanimously. There was a motion to accept the remainder of the division's recommendations as presented. That motion passed unanimously. There was also a motion to place an item on the action log, and that was a review of the application dates versus when tag allocations are made available. And that motion passed unanimously. The board, I think the division is moving toward having tag allocations known before the application period closes. There was a motion to direct the division to place a list of all allocated permits on the division's website. That would include conservation permits and everything. That motion passed unanimously. There was a motion to accept the bull elk permit as presented, with the addition of one additional elk permit on the Little Creek unit. And that motion passed unanimously. There was a motion to have hunters that draw a bison tag take a hunter orientation and shot placement orientation course before they receive their permit. That motion was withdrawn, and it was replaced with a motion to have all bison hunters who are successful in the 2021 draw receive information on shot placement, and to have a orientation course developed by the 2022 season. That motion passed unanimously. There was a motion to increase the hunter's choice bison permits on the Henry Mountain unit from 4 tags to 6 tags. That motion passed unanimously. There was a motion to accept the remainder of the division's once-in-a-lifetime permit recommendations as presented. And that passed unanimously. There was a motion to accept the antlerless permits as presented, passed unanimously. There was a motion to accept the CWMU antlerless permit recommendations as presented. That motion passed with 4 in favor and 2 recused for a conflict of interest. There was a motion to accept the conservation permit rule amendment as presented. That passed unanimously. There was a motion to approve the permit request by the Weber Florence CWMU as presented. That passed unanimously. There was a motion to approve the AIS rule as presented. That passed unanimously. There was a motion to deny the variance request by Clint Heber. That motion passed 5-1. And then there was a motion to accept the Eric Richards stipulation, and that motion passed unanimously. And that was all of the action items that occurred at the last board meeting. Any questions? Hearing none, I'll turn the time over to Jason to give a regional update.
All right, thanks, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the time, and it's good to be with you all this evening. Just a couple things I wanted to mention to the RAC from the last month. Most of it's in aquatics. One thing that our aquatics manager wanted to throw out there to you was that white bass are starting to run at Utah Lake. They're starting to hit more than less. It's getting quite hot down there. So if you have an opportunity to go catch a white bass, now's a great time to go do it down at the lake. Along with that, the Utah Anglers Coalition is going to be touring the Provo River Delta Restoration Project on June 5th. The restoration project is an effort to create a delta that used to exist at the lake, and then as we developed around the lake, it was engulfed by farmland and ranches and everything else that we have going on. And this is an opportunity to restore the delta and create some more floodplain and habitat especially for the June sucker. If there's any RAC members that would be interested in touring the restoration project, just give me a call, contact me, and we'll get you lined up on that. I was able to visit it last week with our staff, and it's going to be a great project. I'm really excited about the opportunities that are going to be provided down there through this project. And then one last thing, we talk a lot about drought and big game, excuse me, wildlife. And one thing I wanted to mention is how drought affects aquatics too, our fish. Our manager wanted me to mention that, we're being very proactive and strategic with our water bodies throughout the region. Of course, with drought, we get less water coming in, water bodies drying up sooner than they have in the past, and warming up and getting into conditions that aren't good for the fish. So we've been strategic on when we stock and where to stock. It might change the patterns of our anglers to some areas that they haven't normally fished before because other ponds may be not available. But it's something that we do every year to some extent, but it's been accelerated this year due to the drought. And I think I'll leave that there. And a couple other things I want to mention. We do have one member of our RAC that will be going off this year, and that's Christine Schmitz. And I just want to recognize her for her service. She's served 2 terms on the RAC, so 8 years. She's done a great job sharing her perspective and experience with this group. She's been stalwart through. She's always attended and when she's able to. And, there's been challenges, but I'm glad to know her and that she was able to hang in with us. So thank you, Chris, for being there and being a valued member of this committee. It's been great to have you on here, and it's been great to get to know you. And then one last thing, Mr. Chair, at our last RAC meeting, there was a question brought up to the division that was brought forward by, I think, maybe Scott, and you forwarded it on to the agency about coordinating comments and discussions that occur in this RAC and helping to bring that to other RACs and help that discussion continue forward. As I've been talking internally with our staff, one of the challenges we have with changing an agenda is the Open and Public Meetings Act. And that act requires that the division post their agenda, well, any agency post their agenda 24 hours prior to the meeting that's going to be taking place. So what that means for our meeting is as we have discussion and topics that we go over, if there's something that we want to add or that would be beneficial to another RAC, we wouldn't be able to post it in time for the Northern Region RAC. The same thing would hold true for the following week for those RACs that are in the Southern, the Southeast, and the Northeast RACs. So with that in mind, I have a suggestion maybe to discuss, and happy to discuss it. Maybe what would be the best is as these comments and discussions come up, maybe the RAC chair could take note of those, identify those things that are important and send an email to the other RAC chairs for the subsequent RACs to make them aware of the items that seem to be important and this RAC would like to have further discussion on. I'd give that to you for your consideration and like to hear back on any comments on that.
So thank you, Jason. Just so in complete awareness, Jason and I already touched base on this a little bit, and I've agreed to do that. It seems like it's the best and really the only option that we have is if we discuss something new, I just draft a letter and send it to the other 4 RAC chairs right after our meeting. Somebody has been having their mic on and has given us some feedback. So if you're not talking, I'd appreciate if you'd shut your mics off. But does anybody have any additional comment on what Jason just presented?
Yeah, I think that's a workable solution. I think it would be nice to do it a different way, but given the constraints you mentioned, let's give that a shot and see how that works for us.
Sounds good. And I'll commit to draft something. If there's anything that's not on the agenda that we discuss, I'll draft that up and I'll copy the our RAC members, but I'll send that email to the other chairs of the other 4 RACs. Okay. Anything else, Jason?
No, that's all I had. Thank you.
Excellent. Man, it's only 1:15 and we're already on to our first action item. I love it. So the first action item, or the first thing we're going to discuss is number 5 on the agenda, which is House Bill 295 Waterfowl Rule Amendments. Blair Stringham provided a presentation. Hopefully, if everybody's had an opportunity to listen to that presentation. We received several comments. Hopefully, everybody's been able to read those emails, and I'll turn the time back over to Jason to present a summary of the online comments.
All right, thanks, Mr. Chair. So as I looked through those comments, we ended up with 14 comments specifically about the waterfowl rule amendment. Sounds like there was a lot of emails that came to the RAC. I didn't see those emails or those comments. The ones I can speak to, we had 10 that strongly disagreed with the rule amendment, specifically with a guiding provision. And most of the kind of the theme there that I could see was that the guides were able to provide access and equipment, basically opportunity for those that may not have the ability or are new to the sport. So there was an added benefit for having those guides with them. We had 3 that strongly agreed with the rule amendment and actually kind of would like to see it go further, should see the regulations go further, and then somewhat agree. There was 1 comment, and I think you saw the comment. Hopefully you were able to look through the comment from the Utah Waterfowl Association, and they laid out 9 additional recommendations to regulate guiding on the WMAs. And that's, and then we also have the chart. Let me pull that up real quick. As far as percentages for strongly disagree, we had 71%, strongly agree 21%, and then somewhat agree 7%. And there were no comments for neutral or somewhat disagree.
Thank you, Jason. I think I received about 130 emails in addition to those 14 comments. I think everybody on the RAC received those. Did everybody on the RAC also receive the letter from SFW? Okay, excellent. Okay, questions for Blair? Questions from the RAC for Blair?
Blair, I have a question. This is Ben. So is there any way we can see the survey? I'd love to see the survey questions and the results. Because I don't know if any of us on the RAC have seen that other than just what was presented in the presentation.
Yeah, absolutely. We could do that. In fact, I put together a little bit of information that kind of gives a little more background and context to the survey, as well as kind of why we're doing it and all that stuff. Mr. Chairman, would it be all right if I shared that and maybe we can just run through?
Absolutely. If it provides greater clarity, that's great.
Okay. Yeah, I think it'll give a little more context to all of it, which hopefully I think will help speed up the whole process here. So let me share this real quick.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. All right. Is everybody seeing that slide?
Yes.
Okay. I'm not going to put it in presentation mode, so I'll just go through this. I can still see you guys. But essentially what got us here was this HB 295 bill, which requires guides to have a permit on our WMAs. And so once that passed through the legislature, it basically made us have to put in place something so that guides could continue to operate on our WMAs. And so I guess I just want to say that it wasn't really our intent to try to rush this through. I realized that that just barely passed in March. It's May now. We're trying to get this basically in place for the upcoming waterfowl season. And we felt like this was probably the best RAC to do that. And so that's why we're bringing it forward now and not waiting till into the future when we meet again in public. It's not necessary to push it through. It's just, we just need to get this in place as soon as possible. Also, for some background, guiding has occurred on our properties for many years now without any restrictions. So it's not necessarily something that is new or anything. It's been happening for a while. It wasn't necessarily a sanctioned activity, but it also wasn't something that we were actively trying to stop either. It just was. I mean, it was happening, and we were all just okay with it. So a little background information on the survey. I want to just kind of, I guess, frame this with how many waterfowl hunters we have in the state. We've got about 26,000 waterfowl hunters based on our last 5-year average. And roughly 96 to 97% of those are residents. We have about 3% of people that hunt in the state are non-residents. But for the most part, most of those are resident hunters. And so when you look at our survey, we had 5,500 people respond to that. And so that essentially equates to about 20% of the waterfowl community based on the people that took this survey. We sorted those out by waterfowl hunters. So keep in mind, it's probably about 20% of the people as we look through the results. Specific to the guiding question, we had fewer people respond to that than participate in the overall survey. So that was about 4,800 people. And again, about 97.5% of those were residents. And about 2.5% were non-residents. And so we used that to, I guess, kind of fact check ourselves a little bit. I know there's been a lot of questions about the survey, the validity of it. And so given that it represents basically what our waterfowl hunting population or hunters are, we feel like the survey was pretty representative of the overall waterfowl community. We also had quite a few people that were concerned that we were pulling data early, which we did when we put forth the presentation. That we used probably 4 days of survey data is all with that, just because of our timelines to get the information out in the RAC packet. And so we pulled the data yesterday morning. So if you'd participated in the survey prior to yesterday 8:30, your survey results would be included in the guiding information we'll be presenting. And so as far as survey results, it's a little bit different than what we presented on just because we had that longer time period and more responses, but overall, they're essentially the same. We gave people essentially 5 options to choose from as they participate in the survey. So it wasn't just a yes, no, or neutral. We had everywhere from a strongly opposed, slightly opposed, neutral, slightly supportive, or strongly supportive. And so what we saw is about 46.4% of people were strongly opposed to guiding. The next group, as you move to the right, the slightly opposed, that was about 16.1%. And then the neutral people were about 23.4%. And on the right side, you can see the slightly supportive. That was about 7.4% of people participated in the survey. And then the strongly support was 6.6%. And so the way we got to basically a yes or no answer was just to combine those strongly and slightly supportive groups on both ends of the spectrum, which gave us essentially no's as being 62.5%, yes is 14%, and neutral about 23%. We also were able to sort people out by user groups. And so we thought that might be important to look at people that primarily hunt WMAs as opposed to refuges or clubs or things like that. The way to interpret this graph is beginning here on the left, you can see the different user groups. These are people that hunt primarily on each one of these 5 areas. And then going across the bottom, beginning on the left side, that dark orange are the strongly opposed people. And so across all user groups, it was roughly the same, a little less than about 0.5% or half than 50% of people were strongly opposed to it, and regardless of where they were hunting. As you move across there, you see the slightly opposed, the neutral, then you get on the right side, the slightly supportive. Again, that was probably about 7%, and the strongly supported were about 6%. And so it was really similar to basically what we saw with the overall survey. We did see a little more support for guiding on private property and duck clubs, probably just because those people aren't interacting with guides and probably had less of an opinion on it. But overall, that's how it looked amongst user groups. A lot of people were also concerned with the non-resident opportunity and how that would impact it. So we were able to sort the non-residents out. Looking at that, it was kind of a similar trend, although there is quite a bit more support for strongly supporting for guiding, which you would assume with people coming into the state probably looking more to use a guide than not. But again, that left side, the strongly supportive is about 41%, or opposed. Slightly opposed, about 12.8, neutral, 17.9, and then on the right side, slightly supportive, 2.6, and strongly supportive, about 25.6. The other thing we were able to pull out is our user days. And so we were able to essentially calculate percentages of how frequently our WMAs are used compared to other areas. I think this is probably one of the more striking things that we saw is that about 56.3% of user days for waterfowl hunters in the state are on waterfowl management areas. So I think it really speaks to just how incredibly important these are for waterfowl hunters, regardless of whether you're guiding or not, as being an opportunity for people to go out and hunt on. You can see, I guess, some of these other user groups or areas as you drop down: private property 15.5, refuges 10%, duck club 7.7. But again, I guess focus on the WMAs are just incredibly important for waterfowl hunters here in Utah. The other interesting thing is that about 71% of people hunt on a WMA at least one day during the season. So again, they're not being used, a lot by everybody, but they are being used by 7 out of 10 people who are waterfowl hunting in the state. And you compare that to some of our other division properties where we get about 3% or less of people hunting on those properties. It really kind of translates into just how important WMAs are. Comparing some of the WMAs themselves, this is a pie graph here of our top WMAs that are used by waterfowl hunters. And essentially 5 of these areas is where about 76.3% of waterfowl hunting occurs. And the top 5% are also where most of the guiding is also occurring. And so that's where some of our concern comes with the interaction, I guess, with guides and all the hunters out there. It is largely happening on just a handful of properties. And so it's also because that's primarily where a lot of birds are. So that's what attracts everybody to those properties. I did a quick comparison just on other states. Some people weren't really sure what the precedence was for this. So I just wanted to give you some background information on what the Pacific Flyway states look like. We have 3 states in the Flyway that don't allow guiding at all on state properties. That's Washington, Idaho, and Montana. Also included that are all federal refuges. So no federal refuges allow guiding as well. There are some states, though, that do allow guiding. With some exceptions, California does allow guiding, although a large portion of what's made from guiding goes back to the state. And so there's essentially no guiding that happens in California because that percentage is so high. Oregon does allow guiding, but there's no money transaction allowed on the property. And Alaska allows it, but they do have to register with the state before they can guide. And then we do have 2 properties in the Pacific Flyway that do allow guiding on their WMAs, and that's Nevada and Wyoming. And lastly, just, I guess, some background context to why we are addressing this now. We knew it was going to be a very polarizing issue. And so it's something that we've had concerns about for a long time, but we just haven't ever addressed it, I guess, because of the nature of the controversy surrounding it. But with the passing of HB 295, we figured this was a good time to at least get some information about it. And so prior to even formulating a recommendation, we talked with the majority of the sportsmen's groups in the states just to get their feeling on where they felt about guiding. Most of them were supportive of guiding restrictions to some extent, some more than others. We also talked with all the waterfowl managers just to get background information from them. And they all had a lot of concerns, which again gave us the support to do this. So then we turned to the public, and we really wanted to find out what the public wanted. So we put the survey out in April, and we got the responses that we did. And based on that and our conversations with these other groups and people, we felt like it was what the public wanted. And so that's the recommendation that we brought forward. We felt like as the management agency, we want to do what the majority of people want. And based on our survey, we felt like this is what they want. So that's why we brought it forward. And also, I guess, just to keep in mind, I know the comments have been fairly low in the RAC. I mean, we only had 14 in this one. I guess just keep in mind, I guess, the context of the survey that, I mean, there is a lot of support for not allowing guiding, and there's generally those people that support our recommendations don't comment. So I guess just keep that in mind as we have our discussion and as you guys move forward to move towards a recommendation. So, Mr. Chair, that's all I have. I can take any other questions people may have.
Thank you, Blair. Anybody have additional questions for Blair?
Yeah, one other question. This was maybe kind of answered, but I'd like a little more. What's the problem that we're trying to solve here?
Okay, no, that's a great question. No, and we hit on it a little bit in some of our things when we did our presentation. One of those is, I guess, just a lack of public hunting opportunity. We feel like, I mean, there's a lot of people that are currently using our properties, and so because of that, having competing interests out there, commercially, people actually out there, taking people out, we feel like there's a lot of negative impacts that are happening from them, both just being out in spots that the person who goes out once a month isn't going to be able to hunt because they're in those really popular spots. We also feel like just in general, there's not a lot of land out there. I mean, very few parts of the states are wetland. And so we specifically manage our properties just to provide a lot of access so that people can have the opportunity. And we feel like guiding is impacting that. We are seeing in some areas quite a bit of just overuse of area. We see guides tend to camp out in certain spots day after day after day. And it's because they're important spots, for hunting and shooting. I mean, they get a lot of birds there, but again, it goes back to kind of some of that opportunity issues that's created there. And then lastly, we have a lot of people that are just kind of doing it without having any kind of licensing, insurance, stuff like that. And why there's not anything specific to being a waterfowl licensed guide in the state, there are some criteria there that they should be meeting and to at least be on state lands, and they're not meeting that. So again, just a way to be able to have more accountability in that regard and make sure people are being safe and the liabilities are low is another reason why we're doing it.
Other questions for Blair?
I have a question, Blair. So when you say that the guides that are not licensed and insured with the state, they don't meet those requirements, do all guides and outfitters need to meet requirements through licensure from the state, or is it just big game guides? Is it also waterfowl guides?
Yeah, Greg, do you want to tackle that one? You're probably a little more familiar with that rule than I am.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Greg Hansen with the Utah AG's office. So the Guides and Outfitters Registration Act, as it currently stands, applies directly to big game guides. HB 295 referenced the Guides and Outfitters Act to incorporate a series of definitions. And so in a way, they're somewhat linked, but as it currently stands, waterfowl guides are not required to be registered under the Guides and Outfitters Registration Act.
Thank you. So Blair, HB 295 requires some sort of permit. Is that correct?
Yep, that's correct. And so it essentially prohibits guiding from our properties without some kind of permit from the division.
Okay.
Yep.
So under this proposal, will there be a permit or will there not be a permit to allow guiding on the WMAs?
So in our proposal, there is a permit. We're not allowing hunting on our WMAs, but we are allowing guides to cross our properties to access other areas. And so for instance, there's a couple of really strategic airboat launches that we have on our WMAs, at Ogden Bay, Farmington Bay. It allows people to launch from there and go out to the Great Salt Lake. And so in order for them to do that, they would have to have a permit from us that allows them to cross our properties, just not to hunt on it. And so there is a permit in place, I guess, just not for hunting on the properties. It's more for transportation reasons.
And then really quick on the swans, are they mostly killed on WMAs or federal refuges or off of those properties?
About a third of the swans shot in the state are shot on the Bear River Bird Refuge. And so they have a large number of swans there, and that's where a good portion of them get shot. There are a fair number that get shot on our WMAs as well. And so between us and the WMAs, and that's probably where the majority of them do get shot, is on one of those two properties. But there are opportunities to take swans in other locations. I mean, guys will occasionally get them out on the lake bed and places like that as well.
Yeah, Blair, this is Ken Strong. How many of these guides or so-called guides do you think would take time to get a permit? I mean, I'm sure that a lot of them are probably, I don't know, they don't really have it as a business, so they don't want to get a permit. I'm just curious.
So for them to legally do it on our properties, based on the legislation that passed, they would have to have the permit. And so whether they do that or not, I mean, I don't know for sure, but if they didn't, they would be in non-compliance and could be cited for that if they were caught.
I've got another question for Greg. Greg, has the division approached the legislature to require other guides and outfitters outside of big game to, fishing, guides and waterfowl guides to be licensed?
So the division spoke to HB 295 during the legislative process, but only related to some of the big game baiting provisions that were also included in that bill. I know we've interacted with the sponsor and answered some questions, things of that nature. But to my knowledge, the question as far as fishing guides has not come up. I'm definitely not involved in those conversations either. So, we're doing our best to put forth a proposal that accomplishes the requirements in HB 295 as it stands, and other changes that come, we'll deal with them as they come.
Thank you, Greg. Any other questions before we move on to discussion?
Yeah, I've got a couple. Larry, you mentioned the issue of camping out day after day on the same spot. I presume it's been a while since I waterfowl hunted, but I'm under the impression that decoys have to be removed every day. They can't be left out overnight. So it's kind of who gets there first in terms of access to any particular location. Is that the way it works?
Yep, that's correct. Yeah, you're not allowed to leave anything on the WMAs if you're not there. So if you were to camp out overnight, you'd be fine. But if you do leave that area, you have to take your stuff with you.
So when you mentioned that many of the guides, one of the issues is the guides are in the same locations day after day. It's not as though there won't be another hunter in that location. It's just that somehow the guides are able to get there earlier than other hunters. Is that the case? Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And it's not always the case. The guides do move around too. But with them being out there, I guess we just see there being less opportunity for anybody else to go out in those spots, particularly when they're in the same areas very frequently.
And then you mentioned this perceived lack of public hunting opportunity. Maybe I just want to clarify there. It seems to me that maybe this is a commercial versus non-commercial discussion rather than a public versus non-private, because the guides are taking public hunters, right? There's no private entity out there. It seems to me it's more of a commercial activity versus a non-commercial. I don't see where there's a lack of public hunting opportunity, because a guide is taking a public hunter, is he not?
Yeah, correct. No, that's probably a lot better way to define it. So it'd be for anybody that's a public hunter. Yeah, and I guess the reason I guess we keep bringing up opportunity is it was pretty obvious in the comments that most of the people that had left comments on us pertaining to guiding had specifically mentioned the opportunity factor, and what that entails to each person is probably different. But I guess the overall message from our survey was a loss of opportunity, and so that's kind of we were hanging our hat on with the recommendation.
Yeah, I'm kind of reluctant to eliminate guiding just for the sake of. I think it gives people who may not have other means or options a way out there. I guess, do we have any data on the numbers of guides? Is that increasing? Do we have a feel for that at all?
So we don't have any actual numbers on guiding because we've never tracked it whatsoever. Based on just anecdotal observations from our WMA managers, that we have seen it growing each year. There's more and more guides that are coming to do it both from out of state and within state. But a lot of them are just kind of flying under the radar. They don't have an actual business or anything like that. They're just advertised on Facebook or KSL. And so we don't know what the number is, but we have seen just the people taking people out for guided hunts increasing for a number of years now.
So in that line or in that vein, if this passes, how do you enforce that? If it's somebody taking their buddies out, how do we distinguish between a guiding outfit versus somebody who's taking friends? Or exchanging hunts in Utah for somewhere else or something along those lines. I guess what I'm concerned about is maybe there are from the emails we got, it sounds like there's maybe a couple of licensed guides in the state, and this is likely to affect them. Whereas many of the other individuals who may be doing the same thing but unlicensed may not be affected at all. They may continue their business model, which is kind of under the radar.
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. A lot of people have asked that. And so within the bill, we use the definition that's in state code. And Greg, I don't know, you may be able to speak to this more than I, but it essentially references $100. And so the transfer of $100 or more occurs for the activity, then it would be considered guiding. So, buying your buddy lunch, it wouldn't, but if I guess the gift or money was greater than that. And Greg, I don't know if you can maybe explain that more in depth.
Nope, that's entirely accurate. $100 compensation limit is what's in the Guides and Outfitters Registration Act, and that's incorporated into our proposal.
So that's $100 gross, not per day or per hour. There's not a way they can split that up to kind of work around that.
I'm sure we see folks that are going to try and game the system no matter what the rules are, but $100 compensation limit.
Well, I'm really impressed by the data, and thanks for presenting that additional data today. 5,000 respondents is pretty substantial. To have that higher proportion opposing guiding, I think really says something about what the waterfowl community feels. So I think I appreciate that data.
So just so I'm clear, sorry, Brock.
You're good.
The Guides Act doesn't address waterfowl guides and outfitters, but we're using the Guides Act to base our decision on waterfowl guides and outfitters. Is that what I'm hearing?
Blair, you want me to take that one?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so HB 295 incorporated by reference the definitions that are in the Guides and Outfitters Act, and that includes the definition of what's considered a guide, what's considered compensation, what's considered outfitting services. There's a slew of definitions in there, and the sponsor incorporated all of those definitions into his bill. Our rule proposal does the same thing, and then applies it directly to waterfowl by being in our waterfowl rule. So it is maybe a not the most elegant way of going about things, but it's what we had to deal with 295, and provides us a little bit of consistency on some of those other definitions, so that we're not reinventing the wheel on those other topics.
Excellent. I appreciate that. That clears it up for me a lot.
Maybe one other question. Maybe somebody from law enforcement might want to chime in on what does this do from a law enforcement perspective? How do you see enforcement, time involved, resolving these issues over the next couple of years?
I believe, Wyatt, are you on the call? Do you want to field that one?
Wyatt, you're on mute still. Now it looks like you're frozen.
I may be frozen, but I think I can talk now at least.
There you go.
So Captain Wyatt Bubak, Division Wildlife Law Enforcement Section. So we'll have to have some internal discussions on how this works. However, there are nuances in a lot of our laws that aren't real clear that we navigate on an annual basis anyways. So through investigation and interviews, we should be able to navigate this. Just have to work through some of the small finer details like we do on some of our other code that currently exists as well.
Thank you. Okay, unless somebody has another question, I'll open this up for discussion among the RAC members.
I've got one question, Brock. This is Eric.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so maybe Blair or whoever wants to answer this. As I read in House Bill 295, it says that the prohibited activities for waterfowl management areas is a commercial guide or outfitter may not use a waterfowl management area for any of the following unless they have a annual permit, and that's for hunting or transporting people. So it seems like I guess my question is, does the survey or the proposal that the division put is actually contradictory to the rule to House Bill 295 as itself? Because it's saying in there that they can't do it without a permit, but the division is proposing just to not even allow it, period.
That's a question for Greg.
Yeah, go Greg.
Yeah, I'll take that one again. So at the very end of HB 295, there's also a savings clause that preserves all of the authorities that the division has under their land use statute and rule. One of those is the regulation of commercial activity and the prohibition of commercial activity on WMAs. So in the rulemaking mandate that's in HB 295, it requires that we come up with an annual permitting process, which we are proposing to do. That's the permitting process for transporting hunters across WMAs by a commercial guide, and just foreclosing the other activity, which is actually hunting on the WMA itself. So under our land use rule and statute, we already had this authority. HB 295 preserves that authority, and there's nothing in HB 295 that mandates that there be commercial hunting on a WMA.
Thank you. Okay, I'll open this up for discussion. What do you guys think? And Chris, sorry.
I'll speak up. I'm kind of leaning towards allowing guides on wildlife management areas if they have a permit, and there's got to be some way to show that they do have a permit. One thing I don't think happened is 295 should have never been. The legislature has no right, to me, making commitments for the division. I don't think they should be involved in that. They did this in several things. They started out with one, ended up with another. But I don't see how you can cut guides out who are taking the public out on a right-of-way area to fish or to duck hunt. You're telling those that don't know how to duck hunt and want to start, if they hire a guide, they're out of bounds. And so I don't know how you can eliminate guides.
Yeah, this is Potts. I'm in the meeting now, Brock. Sorry.
Thank you, Dan.
I listened to the meeting earlier on. But I guided for like 4 or 5 years, a fishing guide, right? And the thing that I learned is that as the regulations or permitting went up, I was less and less encouraged to continue to guide because there's no real money in guiding. If you've ever guided in your entire life, you know that your overhead and everything else just kills you. But it seems to make more sense to me that the wildlife management area manager, in consultation with his superiors and anybody else, should be able to set a limit on the number of formal guides that would be allowed. And then that allows the guides to kind of self regulate in a way, oh, that guy is not a guide, because what I did is I shifted from fishing, being a fishing guide and hunting guide. I shifted to doing exactly what makes this whole thing so wishy-washy, right? I mean, Ken's right. How do you distinguish between the guy taking his buddies and I'm going to get half the elk or something? You know what I mean? It's too tough for law enforcement is what I'm trying to say. So a limit on the number of formal guides might be a solution, a compromise.
Thank you, Danny. Other discussion.
Mr. Chairman, I'll offer an opinion. I've been jotting down some notes. First thing, I want to echo Scott's comment earlier about, because I've been giving this some thought over the last few days. that guided hunters are public hunters as well. They're not private hunters. People that are being guided on public land are public hunters. So I want to make sure we're not falsely categorizing that group of hunters. And I'll state right up front, I've used a guide a few times in my life. For the most part, I'm a very much do-it-yourself hunter. But just on the surface here of House Bill 295 gave the direction to create a permitting process, and yet this recommendation is to just completely eliminate guiding. And we're talking about doing this on public lands, and so I just fundamentally have a problem with that. It goes against the direction of the bill. We allow guiding on Forest Service, on BLM, on wildlife management areas for other species. I don't know that I can get on board with just a complete ban on guides on these waterfowl management areas. I hadn't really considered this, but seeing SFW's letter today and the recommendation that they had of a working committee or a work group to discuss these issues and come up with a solution. I actually think that's a really good idea. I get the people in the room that have the biggest stake in this and work out a solution. And whether that's obviously a permitting process to allow guides, and I would expect that they would be licensed and insured. And then if there's additional regulations that need to be put in place for whether that's limit number of days or requirements that they move from day to day, I don't know what that is. And hence the reason I think a committee would be good to figure that out. I would much prefer that kind of an approach over just this feels like we're just saying, this is too difficult, we don't want to deal with it, so let's just not even allow it. And I feel like we're getting conflicting information from the public here. The survey, results say the people generally want to eliminate guiding, but then all the emails that we've got, Brock, you alluded to this earlier, are 100%. We want to see, or nearly 100%, want to see guides continue to be able to operate on WMAs. So that's my input.
So Ben, I in general agree with everything you just said. I mean, I don't like the idea of saying this. Say there's only 15% of hunters that want a guide. I don't agree with saying you 15% of public hunters don't have access to this land, but you 60% do. None of us want guides in the area we hunt. I hunt on public land, and there's a guide in Wyoming, and there's a guide in the spot every year that I go to hunt, and I don't want him there. He's been out scouting the whole time and knows where to go, but he's there. I don't know. I kind of like SFW's recommendation as well. Let's get all the stakeholders in the room and come up with a compromise that allows those 15% of hunters to still participate in an activity on public land. And I guess that's kind of where I'm at. I've duck hunted a lot, and I've hunted where guides go, and sometimes you have to show up at the marsh at 3 o'clock in the morning if you want to get the spot that you want to hunt. Otherwise, there's somebody else sitting on that spot. And I don't know why a public hunter can't beat the guide there.
Yeah, and Brock, to add to that, I would suggest that whether guiding is allowed or not, I don't think that's going to go away. Like, if you want to get you the spot you want, you're either going to have to beat a guide there, or you're going to have to beat another public hunter there. Or a DIY guy. Like eliminating guiding is not going to eliminate the competition for spots. It's just not. There's we're seeing an increase in demand for hunting across the board here in the state, and that's going to just continue, and people are going to be competing for spots, whether they're guided or not guided.
Right, and this is Potts again, you know, and the other concern I have, you know, as a guide up from the past, the other thing is that
As a
you're just gonna,
non-consumptive guide.
it's just gonna force, it's gonna force things underground. It's like trying to control drugs or something, you know? As a guide, I'm still guiding now, but I'm just taking, like I said, I'm taking part of an elk or something, you know what I mean? So I'm taking meat or something in exchange. I used to take money, but I'm just saying that they'll still take money, but it'll be under the table, and so we're just forcing the thing underground if we try to control the way it's suggested.
No, I think often we let these we do these surveys to get public input and, you know, get a good feel for how the public perceives things, and there's no question that the respondents were strongly opposed to that. I've rarely seen a survey that had numbers like that. But I think in this case, I just can't get behind that. I still don't think that's the correct solution. I appreciate the effort the division went to make the survey, but I still feel like there's got to be a space for guides. I've got family members who used to hunt a lot, and for health reasons, they can't get out on their own. Their only way out now is either with, you know, a buddy who's going to take them, or a guide or outfitter. And it just seems like we're cutting that group entirely out by eliminating guides. So my preference is, as Ben had mentioned, probably kick this back to a user group of folks who have some teeth in the game, and let them hash it out.
Yeah. And for me, I kind of lean on the same side. I'm not really comfortable banning guides on the waterfowl management areas. I think there has to be a way to regulate it. And I think that way to regulate it, unfortunately, would be to include more regulation on waterfowl guides and outfitters, you know, through state code probably, so that anybody that is using it, you know who's using it, you know that they're licensed and insured while they're using state lands. And after serving on the Habitat Council, I see how much money it takes to maintain those waterfowl management areas. And if a guide is running a commercial business on our public lands, he needs to be paying a portion of that maintenance and upkeep. And so I tend to agree with the SFW letter that you know, we need to gather the parties involved and hash that out. And that said, I really appreciate what the divisions tried to do. They've tried to address what the public has wanted. And so in no way would I be trying to throw the division under the bus, but I think in this one, I think there just needs to be a little bit more clarity put out there. So.
And appreciate the effort of the Utah Waterfowl Association. Their letter was well written, and they've been working on this. They should be at the table.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. And I mean, Blair, he's been in this business a long time. He knows good people to get and put around that table, and from all sides and all perspectives. So.
I mean, to me, I look at it like the mule deer or the elk committee. You have differing points of view in there, and you come to a compromise that everybody can support, or that most people can support.
Yeah, Brock, I agree with you there. I think you hit it spot on. That's perfect analogy. I mean, we use those committees in big game all the time, and I feel like we come out with really, really good ideas by, you know, doing that.
And compromises.
Yep.
One question I would have is, does HB 295 tie the division's hands with a date and a timeline? I mean, is there time to put a committee together, or does the division need to act before that could happen?
Oh, that's a great question. Greg, do you want to talk about timelines and I guess where we would be without a structured permit process?
Sure, I can talk about the lack of a structure. You might have to help me on the timeline a little bit, but so HB 295 requires the division report back to interim committee with any changes, any new rules or changes to existing rules that implement the requirements of 295. If we were to not make that deadline, I think the division would be in the position of having to report that we put forth a proposal through our public process. The decision was to hold back and formulate a working group, and that, you know, in a subsequent year we would come back and report. So I don't think it's catastrophic, but I do think we'll have to go through the effort of updating interim committee. I believe they meet in November, if I'm not mistaken, and just report where we are on our process.
Thank you, Greg. Any other discussion, or would somebody like to make a motion? I've only heard really one point of view here.
Mr. Chairman, if we're ready for a motion, I'll take a stab at it. Hearing no other conversation, I move that we, well, let's see, I'm not quite sure how to go about this. Essentially, essentially what we want to do is not approve the division's recommendations and suggest a working group committee, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so moved.
So Ben Louder just moved that we do not approve the division's recommendation to ban guides on WMAs, but recommend the formation of a committee to address this.
I'll second that.
Mr. Chair, just real quick, there were a few other items within that presentation that Blair made for that bill. So does this only go to the guide portion of that?
This is only the guide portion.
Okay, perfect.
And then we'll address the remainder.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Any discussion on the motion? I'll call for a vote. AJ?
Yes.
Ben?
Yes.
Chris?
Yes.
Danny? Danny Potts?
Yeah.
Eric?
Yes.
Ken?
Yes.
Luke?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
And Scott?
Yes.
Passes unanimously. Any more discussion on the remainder of the division's recommendations?
Mr. Chairman, can we get a clarification on what the remaining items are in that?
It's the addition of that Duchesne, the Uinta Basin units.
Oh, okay.
The permits.
Yeah.
And Mr. Chair, this is Greg Hansen with the Utah AG's office. I think there were also some items having to do with the Utah Lake Wetland Preserve.
Oh, that's correct.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, I can give them to you if you want. So yeah, it's
Sure.
the Utah Lake Wetland Preserve, defining how we use dogs, shot types, and firearms there. And then also no new blinds on waterfowl management areas.
I didn't have any issues or concerns over those remaining issues, topics.
I did not either.
Blair, I got one question. How come we do not allow sandhill cranes to be hunted in Utah County?
That's a great question. So we only get a real small number of cranes that we can harvest each year. And so we've directed those permits to areas of the state where we see the most depredation issues. And so those generally are in Box Elder, Cache, Rich, and the Uinta Basin. So while we do have cranes in a lot of other parts of the state, they're just not causing as many problems as they are in those areas. And so we try to put all the permits there just to alleviate the damage and reduce the local crane populations a little bit. We could definitely use a lot more permits if the feds would have let us. So.
Any other discussion? Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion.
I'll
I
move
move that we approve the balance.
Was that Mike?
Or Scott.
I'll second it.
Scott, second. Any discussion on the motion? I'll call for a vote. AJ,
Yes.
Ben,
Yes.
Christine,
Yes.
Danny,
Yeah.
Eric,
Yes.
Ken,
Yes.
Luke,
Yes.
Mike,
Yes.
Scott.
Yes.
Passes unanimously. The next item on the agenda is the electronic meetings rule amendments presented by Kyle Maynard. I'll turn the time over to Jason to summarize the public comments.
All right, thanks, Brock. First of all, just maybe really quickly, as you watched the presentation, you were introduced to Kyle a little bit through YouTube. Probably an unfamiliar face to you, but Kyle's been with us for maybe about 6 months now or so. And if you remember last fall, Marty Bushman was with us, and he's gone on to represent another division. And Kyle's come in to save the day for us. And so we're glad to have Kyle on board with us. He's one of our representatives, along with Greg from the Utah AG's office. So glad to have him here, and excited to see how much he can help us. And this was his first go around on the RAC, and I hope you ask him some really hard questions to break him in. With that, we only had one comment come in from the public on that, and it was to strongly agree with the recommendations.
Thank you, Jason. Any questions for Kyle?
I was wondering if Kyle could let us know what kind of training he received to do a presentation in less than 2 minutes.
Good question. And could he provide it to others?
I'm not sure I know how to answer the first question, but absolutely on the second question. But yeah, Jason, thank you for the introduction, everyone. I'm really excited to be here and excited to help in any way I can and fill any questions and problems everyone runs into. And it's fun. It's been fun the last 5 months. So we'll see what the next several years holds. And there haven't been any questions, but maybe a little unsolicited. But just to reiterate, the edits in the video really speak to just making sure the RACs have the same ability as the board and the electronic meetings rule that we have. And the division is still currently working on what sort of protocol we can have as far as a hybrid system moving forward after COVID restrictions decrease.
Thank you, Kyle. I thought it was pretty straightforward. Any discussion?
Brock, I've got a question. And sorry, I had to step away for a second, so I may have missed this, but I couldn't decipher this in the presentation or going through the rule. Is there, with this new hybrid approach, is there an option for electronic public comment? Like, aside from the current I guess what I'm meaning is public comment from the public during the meeting.
Do you mean like asking questions live during the meeting?
Both questions and comments. Like, so for instance, before we went electronic, with the in-person meetings, we had a question period where public could ask questions, and then a comment period where they fill out a comment card and then get up and make their comments. And I know I feel this way, and I think a lot of our fellow RAC members and wildlife board members feel this way too, that has largely been missing in this process for the last little year plus. And and we would really like to get that ability for the public to be able to comment during the meeting back. So that I guess that's what I'm looking for.
Sure. Yeah, the rule changes themselves specify that there should be some mechanism for the public to provide electronic comment. The timeliness of that is more on the of division as they develop the protocol on what our tech department can actually feasibly do.
Okay, so that I think that makes sense. So the rule doesn't restrict that type of a comment or necessarily provide for, that it must happen. Rather, that will be in the implementation of it. Okay,
correct.
Fair.
Thank you, Ben and Kyle. Other questions or discussion? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion.
Yeah. Hello, Brock.
Yeah.
I'd like to make a comment.
Okay.
And that's that I agree with what Ben said. And I think it's very important that these people have a right to ask questions and discuss things during a RAC meeting. I know it makes the meetings go longer. I know it can be a pain, but I think they have that right.
Thank you, Ken. I agree. Actually, I enjoy the question part because oftentimes they ask a question that I haven't thought about, and I'd like to know the answer. It informs my thinking. More so than the comments. The questions really inform my thinking. I'm still would be willing to entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'll go ahead and make the motion that we approve as presented.
Thank you, Ben. A second?
Second.
From Scott?
Second by Eric.
Thank you very much, Scott.
Thank you, Eric.
Did Eric do it too?
Eric got that one.
Okay, Eric, you're on. I'll call for a vote. AJ?
Yes.
Ben? Ben?
Yes.
Thank you. Christine?
Yes.
Danny?
Yeah.
Eric?
Yes.
Ken?
Yes.
Luke?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
Scott?
Yes.
Passes unanimously. That's all I have on the agenda. I would like to, before we end the meeting, I would definitely like to thank Christine for all of her dedicated service, as did Jason. She's been a stalwart member of the committee, been here, I think, all but one meeting that I've attended, and she's done a fantastic job. So thank you very much, Christine. And I'm sure everybody on the board, the RAC, will hold up a thumbs up that they appreciate you as well. And we really appreciate all you've done. Does anybody have anything else? So that you know, Mike, whatever your name is, I will write a little note to the other chairs to tell them what our motion was that went against the recommendations of the division, and I'll send that yet tonight or definitely tomorrow before the Northern Region has a chance to meet. Anything else? One last chance. Holy smokes.
I just wanted to say thank you to all of you guys for what you do, because It's been my pleasure, and I've learned a lot to be on this RAC. So thanks very much.
Oh,
Thank you, Chris.
thank you. Hearing nothing else, at 7:15, I will move to adjourn. All those in favor of adjourning, aye.
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 Thanks, everybody, for all your
Thanks.
efforts.